So how do you decide what elements belong in a poem versus don't belong in a poem? Have you ever finished a poem?
That's not that funny. And people don't write as much when they're happy. And,
Too happy.
yeah, too happy to write poetry.
Karen, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you for asking me.
How did you decide on the poems that you used for tonight's set?
If anybody knows me and they know me well, I don't fret on set list. I just sometimes run through and just go, okay, I'll do this one. I've even done a set where I just did like the letter T and took my poems that were all started with the letter T and did that. But tonight's poems were part of the writing sample that I sent to Sayuli for application to Spark to Fire program that she's doing.
So this set was a little bit different in that it was almost like a submission.
As a writing sample.
Okay, so maybe the better question would be, how did you if you're submitting to something like this, how do you put pieces together to submit?
I just kind of took a bunch of them that I thought would cover sort of a span of my work. A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Why?
Why?
Why did you want to give a span of work versus being like, I feel like I have a specific theme and style, so I'm just going to kind of demonstrate that repeatedly?
Well, one, my work is kind of all over the place. I'm the dabbler. I'm basically a storyteller at heart. A lot of my poems are poems of memoir. I, of course, have nature poems and just things that have been kicked off by quotes, song lyrics, whatever. So I thought it would be nice to give a sample of what I do, which is a little of everything.
So if you're doing a lot of memoiristic writing, why not write a memoir?
Because the Spark to Fire program is pushing us toward having a collection by the end of this year project. And, my collection will have more of my memoir stuff in it.
But do you feel like even in terms of your normal writing, like have you ever leaned more into like kind of nonfiction memoir, or do you feel like poetry's kind of always been the form?
Poetry's always been the form because it's a lot easier for me than writing essays or even flash fiction. Although there's someone in the room who does great flash fiction, but she doesn't share. Anyway.
Karen Scott's calling out people in the audience. I am so sorry.
I'm looking at them.
On her birthday, no less.
I know.
Wow. Have you ever tried nonfiction?
No, not really.
And you're like, I don't want to.
No, I like poetry. It flows.
Speak to that more. What do you mean it flows?
Basically, it's easier for me. I write mostly free verse, and so just if I've got an idea and I've got something to say, it's just easier to put it into poetry than it is to write in another form.
How do you define poetry?
Yeah, because poetry covers so many different forms and aspects. I think poetry is usually a snapshot rather than a whole well-developed story. And poetry is often defined by the language that you use and lack thereof. I mean, taking out articles, etc., and writing in concise language. So, and it has a flow and a rhythm, mostly.
I guess maybe on the other hand of that, you're someone who's very active in like advanced reader copies of books and things like that. What are some of the differences that you see between prose and nonfiction versus poetry?
I think prose gives you a lot more time to develop scenery, develop characters if you've got characters, whereas poetry, you're like, here it is, and there. You're in and you're out. So, other things about prose. A lot of the advanced reader copies that I do read, yes, they fill out they're able to set a scene, build a world, etc., and in a lot less space than poetry gets to. So.
Do you think that you would like to see prose kind of take more of those lessons from poetry in terms of conception of things, or why do you think that doesn't happen?
Prose, you really do need that time and space, especially if you're writing a novel or anything longer than flash fiction, even short stories, to set to setting and then to get across whatever action this particular story has. So I think it needs the space to fill up, whereas poetry, again, is a snapshot. So here's this moment in time, here's what happened, here's these people, and I don't have to go into great detail about what's going on.
Because you don't want to go into great detail?
That can sometimes get boring.
Pete, tell me more about that. What do you find boring about it? That's interesting.
No, I mean, the beauty of poetry is that you don't have to fill in every detail.
So how do you decide what elements belong in a poem versus don't belong in a poem? Is that okay if I truncate that? Okay.
Part of it is in the kind of poet that I am. I mean, there are some poets who write every day and they're regimented. I'm what I have termed a percolator poet, that things swirl around in my brain until they're ready to come out on the paper, and then when they are, then I dump them all at one time. And a lot of times the first draft, that's me getting everything out that needs to be on paper. And then revision is where getting rid of things takes place. And sometimes I have the help of people in my writing group to let me know that, this whole verse doesn't need to be in here.
This feels like a very targeted comment. I'll come back. Just to rephrase the question again, so how does reading fiction kind of inform your poetry?
A lot of, I said before during the reading that a lot of times some poems are kicked off by lines, sometimes from books that I'm reading, ideas, the lyric, song lyric, etc. And basically I have several poems that are written on what I was reading. You know, some idea came out of that story that I wanted to do a poem and get it on paper. So.
Have you ever finished a poem?
That's not that funny. It's hard to tell when a poem is actually done. And actually in any art, I mean, sometimes if I'm drawing something or, painting something, you sometimes don't know when it's done until you've gone one step too far.
Now it's done.
Now I don't like it. But with poetry, I mean, revision takes place even up to the time you step up to the mic a lot of times. A poem gets to a point, but you could always make changes. And I have actually revised on the fly at a mic, drop that, but no one
Just
knows
tonight,
I'm doing it. And also, a poem could be done for a submission, but you might decide a little later, I want to change that poem or whatever. And it technically wasn't done. It was done at that moment, but it needs to grow some more.
Final question from Matthias.
So I think that you are one of the most poetry community involved poets.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of times we're trying to figure out where to go for advice as far as writers or just being a part of the community. But being that not only are you it's very rare that somebody's a really, really good writer and they're really, really in the community all at the same time. So what would be your advice for people that are trying to engage with poetry community and trying to engage with poetry?
Ooh. Now he's asking origin story questions, right? I used to have a bio before I had any publications. My bio basically said that I wrote my first poem when I was 7. And my mom criticized it, and I didn't write anymore until I got into my 20s. And then that was when I met my husband, and then you start living a blissful life, and people don't write as much when they're happy. And
Too happy.
yeah, too happy to write poetry. But where was I going with that?
You got sad.
Yeah, I did. Most everybody knows I'm a widow, so yeah, and have a mom who I had a mom who had Alzheimer's, and yeah, there's plenty of sad stuff to write about, but it depends on how you present it in a poem. As far as getting into the community, I got back into poetry thanks to my daughter, and that's another whole story. She went to Metro Early College, and also in your junior and senior year, she had the opportunity to be part of a program called Mosaic, and that's where you got your humanities credits because Metro is more of a STEM school. And they got to explore things and do a lot of out-of-classroom learning. And even before they started the 1 year, 2010, they had a list. They had given them a list of things that they might want to experience. And on their Writing Wrongs open mic was listed. And I went with Alex on her first visit there. And then I dropped her off for a month of Tuesdays, and then I went back, and then I started writing, and then I started reading on the mic, which was kind of a challenge for a formerly very shy person, but I've learned, yeah, you don't believe that, do you? But poetry helped me become more outgoing. Okay.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for being with us. Everyone here, thank you guys so much for being with us.
Thank you guys for coming.
Karen.